My name is Allison. I'm 34 years old, and I built my dream waterfront home after my family disowned me 16 years ago. I've created a successful interior design business completely on my own. So when my mother called out of the blue after nearly 2 decades of silence demanding to use my house for my golden child brother Daniel's wedding, I almost couldn't believe her audacity. What came next was even more shocking. Before I tell you how I handled this family ambush, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up to family who only remember you when they need something. Growing up in Boston, I always knew where I stood in my family's hierarchy. My parents, Eleanor and Frederick Anderson, made it abundantly clear that my brother Daniel was their pride and joy while I was simply expected to excel without recognition. Our modest suburban home became the stage for this ongoing family dynamic, with Daniel's achievements prominently displayed throughout the living room while mine were tucked away in drawers or forgotten entirely. From elementary school spelling bees to high school science competitions, I pushed myself to earn my parents' approval. I still remember bringing home my perfect SAT scores, hands trembling with excitement, only to have my mother glance at the paper and say, "Well, that's expected. Did you finish your college applications yet?" Meanwhile, when Daniel brought home his slightly lower scores, our parents took the entire family out for a celebratory dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town. Daniel has always been naturally gifted. My mother would tell relatives at family gatherings, "Allison just works hard." The subtle diminishment stung every time, implying that no matter how much I achieved, it was simply the result of grinding effort rather than any inherent worth or talent. My father, a corporate attorney with political aspirations, had mapped out both our lives with military precision. Daniel would follow in his footsteps into law, eventually joining my father's firm before launching a political career. I was expected to become a doctor, creating the perfect power family that would enhance our social standing. Any deviation from this plan was treated as personal betrayal. Art and design had always been my escape. While other teenagers had posters of bands on their walls, I filled mine with architectural sketches and interior layouts I'd created. My dream was to study interior design, to create spaces that made people feel both inspired and at peace. When I tentatively mentioned this career path during my junior year of high school, my father's face turned an alarming shade of red. "No daughter of mine is going to waste her potential on frivolous decorating," he declared, slamming his fist on our dining table hard enough to make the silverware jump. "We've invested too much in your education for you to throw it away on some hobby." The tension in our house intensified as college application season arrived. I dutifully completed applications to all the prestigious medical schools my parents selected, but secretly also applied to the Rhode Island School of Design. When my acceptance letter arrived, I felt a mix of elation and dread. This was my dream, but I knew sharing it would ignite a firestorm. I chose to announce my decision at Sunday dinner, foolishly hoping that being in public might temper their reaction. Daniel, home from his first year at Harvard Law, watched with widening eyes as I slid my RISD acceptance letter across the table. "I've decided to study interior design," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "This is where my passion lies, and I'm really good at it." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set down her fork with deliberate precision, while my father's face went completely blank, which I knew from experience was far more dangerous than any shouting. "Perhaps we should discuss this at home," my mother suggested, her voice glacial as she signaled for the check. The drive home passed in silence so thick it felt suffocating. Once inside, my father didn't even remove his coat before he started. "You have exactly one choice, Allison," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "You will attend Harvard Medical School as planned, or you will no longer be welcome in this family." I looked to my mother, hoping for even the smallest sign of support, but her expression remained impassive. "Your father and I have sacrificed everything to give you opportunities," she added. "This is how you repay us?" "With selfishness." The most painful part was watching Daniel, my older brother by 3 years, staring at his shoes. Not once did he look up or speak in my defense. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw something like regret flash across his face before he looked away. "I can't give up my dream," I finally said, tears spilling despite my best efforts. "I need to do this." My father's response was immediate. "Then you need to leave. Tonight. You're no longer welcome here if you insist on this foolishness." "Dad, it's almost midnight," Daniel finally spoke. But his objection was weak, perfunctory. "She's had 18 years of our support," my father replied. "That ends now." I was given 30 minutes to pack a single suitcase. My mother stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms crossed, as if afraid I might steal something. As I frantically grabbed essentials, the reality of what was happening crashed over me in waves. Where would I go? How would I survive? The design program didn't start for 3 months, and my savings were minimal. As I dragged my suitcase down the stairs, I saw Daniel hovering in the hallway. "I'll talk to them," he whispered, "once they calm down." But his promise rang hollow. He'd never stood up to our parents before, always carefully protecting his golden child status. Why would this time be different? My father didn't even look up from his newspaper as I passed through the living room one last time. My mother handed me an envelope containing $300. "This is more than generous," she said. "Don't come back asking for more." And just like that, I was standing on the sidewalk outside the only home I'd ever known, watching my mother close the door firmly behind me. No goodbye, no good luck, just the decisive click of the lock sliding into place. I spent that first night in a cheap motel, curled around my suitcase, crying until I had no tears left. The next morning, I called my only real friend from high school, Caitlin, whose family let me stay on their couch for 2 weeks until I found a tiny studio apartment and 2 waitressing jobs to support myself. In those early days, I kept expecting a call from my parents. Surely they wouldn't actually disown their only daughter over a career choice? I checked my phone constantly, jumping whenever it rang. But the call never came. No text messages. No emails. Not even a letter. It was as if Allison Anderson had simply ceased to exist in their world. Even Daniel, who I'd always protected and looked up to despite our parents' favoritism, maintained radio silence. I sent him several messages those first few months, but received only a single brief reply: "They need time. Focus on school." After that, nothing. Birthdays passed. Holidays. Graduations. Life milestones that should have been shared with family were instead celebrated with the new community I slowly built around myself. The absence of my family transformed from an acute pain to a dull, persistent ache that I learned to live with. Little did I know that 16 years later, they would suddenly remember my existence when it became convenient for them. The day I signed the papers for my first apartment, I cried in my car for an hour afterward. Not from sadness, but from pure pride. After being thrown out with just a suitcase and $300, I had somehow managed to secure a place of my own. It wasn't much. A studio apartment with barely enough room for a bed and a desk, but it was mine, paid for with money I had earned myself. My journey from homeless teenager to independent adult wasn't linear or easy. Those first months were a blur of exhaustion. I worked morning shifts at a local diner and evening shifts at an upscale restaurant, changing uniforms in public bathrooms between jobs. Every dollar I made was meticulously allocated, with the majority going toward my tuition fund. I lived on ramen noodles and day-old bread from the bakery where the owner took pity on me and sold me leftovers at a deep discount. My salvation came in the form of Sofia Ramirez, an interior designer who regularly came to the upscale restaurant where I waited tables. I made a point to always serve her section, fascinated by the sketches she would work on while dining alone. One evening, when the restaurant was nearly empty, I worked up the courage to compliment a particularly beautiful room concept she was drawing. "You have a good eye," she said, looking at me with new interest. Do you know anything about design? That simple question opened a door I never expected. After learning about my situation and seeing some of my sketches, Sophia offered me a part-time position as her assistant. The pay was modest, but the experience was invaluable. More importantly, it was my first step into the world I had sacrificed everything to join. Sophia became more than a boss. She became my mentor and friend. When she learned I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a bed frame, she insisted on taking me to estate sales and teaching me how to spot quality furniture that could be restored. My tiny apartment slowly transformed as I applied my developing skills, turning discarded pieces into treasures. You have a gift for seeing potential where others see trash, Sophia told me one day as we refinished an abandoned dining table I'd found on the curb. That's a rare talent in this business. Working with Sophia taught me more than design principles. She showed me how to navigate client relationships, how to manage a business, and most importantly, how to believe in myself when no one else did. Under her guidance, I excelled in my design program, graduating at the top of my class despite my grueling work schedule. Throughout those years, I remained hyper-aware of my financial situation. While other students took out loans for living expenses or relied on family support, I maintained 3 jobs and rationed every penny. My singular focus was to never again be at the mercy of others for my survival. I opened a savings account specifically for buying a home, contributing to it even when it meant skipping meals or walking miles to save on bus fare. By my mid-20s, I had worked my way up from Sophia's assistant to a junior designer at a respected firm. My portfolio grew, along with my confidence and client list. When Sophia decided to retire at 65, she recommended several of her long-standing clients to me, giving my career a significant boost. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me over dinner on her last day. "Except you're more talented than I ever was. Don't let what your family did define you, Allison. Their loss is the design world's gain." On my 30th birthday, I achieved what once seemed impossible. I had saved enough for a down payment on a property. Not just any property, but a rundown waterfront home about an hour outside the city. The house itself was nearly uninhabitable, with structural issues that scared away most buyers, but I saw its potential immediately. The real estate agent thought I was crazy, warning me repeatedly about the extensive renovations required. "I've been preparing for this my entire adult life," I told her as I signed the papers. "I'm not afraid of hard work." For the next 2 years, I poured every spare moment and dollar into transforming that dilapidated house. I designed each room myself, calling in favors from contractors I'd networked with over the years. On weekends, I learned to sand floors, repair drywall, and paint like a professional. The transformation was so dramatic that a local magazine featured it in their Extreme Makeover section, which brought in a flood of new clients. As my business grew, I was able to launch my own design firm. I started small, just myself and an assistant working from a converted sunroom in my home. But word spread quickly about my talent for breathing new life into tired spaces. Within 3 years, I had a team of 5 designers and a downtown office space. Throughout this time, I built what I came to think of as my chosen family. My best friend Jessica, whom I met in design school, stood by me through every triumph and setback. When she married Marcus, he embraced me as a sister. Their children called me Auntie Allison, and their home became my second home, especially during holidays when the absence of my biological family felt most acute. I tried dating occasionally, but found it difficult to trust enough to form lasting relationships. My therapist, Dr. Laura, helped me understand that my family's rejection had left wounds that needed conscious healing. "You've mastered self-reliance," she told me once. "But allowing yourself to be vulnerable with others is its own kind of strength." Through mutual acquaintances and social media, I occasionally heard snippets about my family. My father had indeed gone into politics, serving a term as state senator. Daniel had joined my father's law firm as planned and married into another politically connected family. My mother had become the president of several prestigious charity boards, crafting the perfect public image of family success. Not once in 16 years did any of them reach out to me. Not when my business was featured in Architectural Digest. Not when I won a National Design Award. Not even when my father suffered a minor heart attack. News I learned about through a former high school classmate. I convinced myself that I had made peace with their absence in my life. I had proof all around me that I could not only survive but thrive without them. My beautiful home, my successful business, my chosen family all stood as testament to my resilience. But sometimes, in quiet moments watching Jessica's family or walking alone on my private beach, I would feel a hollow ache for what might have been. Not regret, exactly, but awareness of the fundamental human need for acceptance from those who are supposed to love us unconditionally. I had built a life beyond what even I had imagined possible, but I couldn't have predicted how my family would suddenly reappear, assuming they could simply claim access to what I had created without them. It was a Tuesday morning like any other. I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing client proposals while enjoying my second cup of coffee when my phone rang with an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was a telemarketer, but something compelled me to swipe the screen. "Hello, Allison speaking," I said, still scrolling through fabric options on my laptop. "Allison, this is your mother." Those 5 words froze me completely. The voice was instantly recognizable despite the 16 years that had passed since I'd heard it. Slightly more husky perhaps, but still carrying that distinctive crisp enunciation that had intimidated my childhood friends. Words failed me entirely. In all the scenarios I'd imagined over the years, I'd never actually planned what I would say if this moment came. "I trust you're well," she continued, as if we'd spoken last week rather than last decade. "I'm calling about an important family matter." The casual tone, devoid of any acknowledgement of our estrangement, sent a wave of anger through me so intense I nearly hung up. But curiosity won out. What family matter would that be? I finally managed, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "Your brother is getting married in 3 weeks. I'm sure you've heard through the grapevine. He's marrying Amelia Hawthorne, the congressman's daughter," she added, as if the political connection was the most important detail. Of course I hadn't heard. I'd deliberately disconnected from any network that might bring news of my family. The pain of constant updates about a life I wasn't allowed to participate in had proven too much to bear. "Congratulations to Daniel," I said stiffly. "But I don't understand why you're calling me about this now." "We've had an unfortunate situation develop with the venue," my mother continued, ignoring my obvious confusion. "A pipe burst at the country club last night, causing significant water damage to the ballroom. With the wedding so close, there are simply no suitable alternatives available." A cold certainty began forming in my stomach about where this was heading, but it seemed so absurd I couldn't quite believe it. "A mutual acquaintance mentioned your home on the water. Caroline Winters? She attended that charity event you hosted last spring. She showed me pictures, and it's exactly what we need. The ceremony could be held on your beach, with the reception on your back lawn. The house would provide perfect facilities for the bridal party to prepare." I sat in stunned silence, unable to process the audacity of what I was hearing. After 16 years of complete rejection, my mother was calling not to apologize, not to reconcile, but to use my home as a wedding venue? "Let me understand this correctly," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You haven't spoken to me since you threw me out at 18. No calls, no cards, nothing. And now you want to host Daniel's wedding at my house." There was a brief pause before my mother spoke again, her voice taking on the impatient tone I remembered all too well from childhood. "Allison, this is hardly the time to dredge up ancient history. This is about your brother's special day. Surely you can set aside petty grievances for Daniel's sake." "Petty grievances?" I repeated, incredulous. You disowned me. You cut me out of the family completely because I chose to study design instead of medicine. And look how well that worked out for you, she replied, as if the success I'd achieved somehow justified their abandonment. You clearly landed on your feet. Now you have an opportunity to show there are no hard feelings by helping your family in their time of need. The manipulation was so transparent it would have been laughable if it wasn't so painful. Not a word of apology, not a hint of regret. Just an expectation that I would eagerly open my home to the people who had shut me out of their lives. The wedding is on the 24th. She continued, apparently taking my silence as consideration. We would need access to the property the day before for setup. The guest list is approximately 200 people. I'll have my event planner contact you with the details. Something inside me snapped. No, I said firmly. Excuse me. I said no, mother. I will not be hosting Daniel's wedding. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. I don't think you understand the situation, Allison. The Hawthorne family has connections to the governor. This wedding will be attended by some very influential people. It would be an excellent opportunity for you to make important contacts for your little business. The condescension in little business wasn't lost on me. My firm had been featured in national publications and had a waiting list of clients, but in her eyes, it would always be less than what she had wanted for me. My answer is still no, I repeated. If you want to discuss rebuilding our relationship, I'm open to that conversation. But it needs to start with acknowledgement and apology for what happened, not with demands to use my home. This is exactly the sort of selfishness that caused problems in the first place. She snapped, her polite veneer cracking. Always thinking about yourself instead of what's best for the family. The irony was staggering. The family made it very clear I wasn't part of it anymore. I reminded her. You can't disown someone and then expect to use their resources when it's convenient. I'm disappointed in you, Allison, she said coldly. Your father will be hearing about this. Expect his call. And with that, she hung up. No goodbye, no thanks for considering. Just the abrupt termination of the call. Some things, apparently, never changed. I sat motionless at my kitchen island, coffee forgotten as emotions crashed over me in waves. Anger at the entitlement. Hurt at the casual dismissal of 16 years of absence. And underneath it all, a small, traitorous flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be the beginning of reconciliation, however messily it had started. That hope was quickly extinguished when my father called the next day. Unlike my mother, he dispensed with any pretense of pleasantries. Your mother tells me you're refusing to help with Daniel's wedding, he said immediately after I answered. I thought you would have outgrown this rebellious phase by now. 34 years old. Running my own successful business, and he still spoke to me as if I were a defiant teenager. It's not rebellion to refuse to host a wedding for people who haven't spoken to me in 16 years. I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded despite my racing heart. Water under the bridge, he dismissed. Family helps family in times of need. I wasn't family when I needed help. I reminded him. I wasn't family for the past 16 holidays, birthdays, or life events. His sigh was heavy with exaggerated patience. Allison, you made your choice. We respected that. Now it's time to act like an adult and do what's right for your brother. This wedding is important for his future. The conversation continued in circles, with my father alternating between authoritative demands and thinly veiled threats about missing an opportunity to rejoin the family. When those tactics failed, he switched to questioning my success, suggesting that I was probably exaggerating the size and quality of my property, and that someone in your position should be grateful for the exposure this wedding would bring. After 15 minutes, I ended the call, reiterating that my answer was final unless a genuine apology and effort at reconciliation preceded any requests. 2 days later, Daniel himself called. His approach was different, starting with awkward small talk about my life and business before eventually getting to the point. There was even a half-hearted apology, though it rang hollow. focusing more on how he felt bad about how things turned out rather than acknowledging any personal responsibility for maintaining 16 years of silence. Amelia's really stressed about finding a new venue, he explained, his voice taking on the cajoling tone he'd used as a child when trying to get me to do his chores. You'd really like her, Ollie. She's creative like you. The childhood nickname sent an unexpected pang through my heart. Once upon a time, Daniel had been not just my brother, but my friend. Before our parents' expectations had divided us, we'd built blanket forts together and invented secret languages. Where had that brother gone? I'm sure she's lovely, I said, meaning it. But that doesn't change the situation, Daniel. You can't expect to reappear in my life after 16 years and immediately ask for such a huge favor without any real attempt at making amends. Come on, Ollie, don't be difficult, he sighed. It's just one day. We're family. Are we? I asked quietly. Because family doesn't abandon each other the way you all abandoned me. The call ended with Daniel promising to think about what I said and get back to me, but I knew from his tone that he had no intention of addressing the real issues between us. Like my parents. He simply expected me to fall in line with their needs. What I didn't know then was that while these conversations were taking place, my family was already moving forward with plans to use my home, regardless of my consent. It wasn't until Jessica called me, voice tight with anger, that I learned the true extent of their presumption. Did you know your brother's wedding invitations list your address as the venue? She demanded without preamble. What? That's impossible. I explicitly told them no. Well, Caroline Winters just showed me the invitation. It definitely says, the Anderson family welcomes you to celebrate at the waterfront home of Allison Anderson, followed by your exact address. Shock rendered me temporarily speechless. They wouldn't really be so brazen, would they? But even as I asked myself the question, I knew the answer. Of course they would. They had always acted as if my boundaries didn't matter. My suspicions were confirmed the next day when I received a call from a catering company confirming delivery details for the 24th. Then a rental company about chairs and tables. Then a florist. With each call, the reality became clearer. My family wasn't asking to use my home, they were planning to use it regardless of my answer. The final confirmation came during another call from Daniel, who, when confronted, admitted the truth. Look, we knew you'd come around once you had time to think about it, he said defensively. And if not, well, what were you going to do? Turn away 200 guests, including the governor, when they showed up at your door? Of course not. You'd make the best of it like you always do. The calculated manipulation left me breathless. They had intentionally created a situation where they thought I would be forced to comply rather than cause a scene. They were counting on the same people-pleasing tendency that had made me an easy target for their control throughout my childhood. But I wasn't that compliant child anymore. And they had severely underestimated what 16 years of building myself from nothing had taught me about standing my ground. After hanging up with Daniel, I sat on my deck overlooking the water, trying to process the magnitude of what my family was attempting to do. They weren't just disrespecting my boundaries. They were planning an invasion of my home, my sanctuary. The one place in the world that was wholly mine. The panic attack hit without warning. One moment I was staring at the gentle waves, the next I couldn't breathe, my chest constricting as if bound by iron bands. My vision tunneled and sweat beaded across my forehead despite the cool breeze. I hadn't experienced an attack this severe since the early days after being disowned, when the sheer terror of my situation would overwhelm me in the dark hours of night. I fumbled for my phone, managing to call Jessica despite my trembling hands. She arrived 30 minutes later with Marcus, finding me still on the deck, now wrapped in a blanket, as I shivered despite the warm day. They think they can just take over, I kept saying. They think I won't stop them. Jessica's face hardened with protective anger as I explained the full situation. Marcus, usually the calm mediator, looked equally outraged. They can't do this, Jessica insisted, her arm tight around my shoulders. It's trespassing. It's illegal. They don't care, I said, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. They've never cared about legality or fairness when it comes to getting what they want. My father's a lawyer and ex-politician. He probably thinks he can talk his way out of any consequences. Marcus, who worked in corporate security, had been quietly listening until now. You need to take this seriously, Allison, he finally said. 200 people showing up uninvited isn't just an inconvenience, it's a security risk. Your property could be damaged, items stolen, not to mention your personal safety. His words cut through my emotional turmoil, grounding me in practical concerns. He was right. This wasn't just about my feelings. It was about protecting myself and my home from very real potential harm. What should I do? I asked, looking between them. First, document everything, Jessica said immediately. Every call. Every communication where they've admitted they're planning this without your permission. Then you need legal representation, Marcus added. Someone needs to send them formal notice that they don't have permission to use your property. And security, Jessica insisted. You need to make sure they physically can't access your property that day. Their clear, actionable advice helped calm my racing thoughts. This was a problem with solutions. I didn't have to face it alone, and I didn't have to be victimized by my family again. Over the next week, I implemented their suggestions and more. My first call was to Andrea Wilson, a tough corporate attorney I'd worked with on business contracts. She listened to my situation with increasing disbelief. Let me get this straight, she said when I finished explaining. Your estranged family, who you haven't spoken to in 16 years, is planning to hold a 200-person wedding at your private residence against your explicit refusal. And they've already sent out invitations with your address. That's correct. That's not just inappropriate, Allison, it's potentially criminal trespass. We need to send cease and desist letters immediately to all parties involved, including the wedding vendors they've contracted. Andrea drafted formal letters that same day, sending them by courier to my parents, Daniel, the Hawthorne family, and every vendor I'd been able to identify from the calls I'd received. The letters explicitly stated that none of these parties had permission to enter my property for any purpose related to the wedding, and that any attempt to do so would result in legal action. Next, I contacted a security company recommended by Marcus. The owner, a former police officer named James, visited my property to assess the situation and develop a security plan. Your home is actually fairly easy to secure, he noted as we walked the perimeter. Limited access points, good visibility. We'll station guards at your gates and along the beachfront. Anyone without explicit permission from you will be turned away. What if they try to force their way in? I asked, knowing my father's determination. We'll document everything and contact law enforcement immediately, James assured me. But in my experience, most people back down when confronted with professional security. No one wants to be on camera committing trespass, especially not politically connected families. I also installed additional security cameras covering all approaches to my property, with feeds I could monitor remotely. Signs clearly stating private property, no trespassing, were posted along my boundaries, removing any possibility of claiming ignorance. As a final precaution, I decided not to be home on the wedding day. Jessica and Marcus invited me to stay with them, where I could monitor the security feeds remotely while being safely away from any confrontation. You shouldn't have to hide from your own family, Jessica argued when I told her my plan. I'm not hiding, I clarified. I'm choosing not to engage directly. There's a difference. Nothing I could say in person would make them understand or respect my boundaries more than the actions I'm taking. With each measure implemented, my anxiety gradually transformed into something else, a steely resolve I developed through years of self-reliance. My family had taken so much from me already, my childhood, my sense of belonging. Years of potential relationship. They would not take my home or my peace of mind. The day before the planned wedding, I received a flurry of increasingly desperate messages from Daniel, ranging from angry accusations to pleading. "You're ruining everything," one text read. "Dad's furious." "Amelia's parents are talking about calling off the wedding entirely." Another message attempted guilt. "Amelia's been crying all day." Is that what you want? To make an innocent person suffer because of old family drama? I didn't respond to any of them. The time for conversation had passed when they decided to ignore my explicit refusal and attempt to force their way into my home. Any response now would only open the door to further manipulation. That evening, as I packed an overnight bag for my stay with Jessica and Marcus, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I was standing up to my family not through heated words or emotional confrontations, but through clear, consequential boundaries. They had underestimated me, assuming I was still the compliant daughter desperate for their approval. They were about to discover just how much I had changed in 16 years. The morning of what should have been Daniel's wedding dawned clear and beautiful, the kind of perfect early summer day that wedding planners dream about. Sitting in Jessica's kitchen with my laptop open to the security camera feeds, I felt an odd mixture of emotions, anxiety, sadness, but also a quiet confidence in my decision. "You doing okay?" Jessica asked, setting a mug of coffee in front of me. Marcus sat across the table, his own laptop open as he monitored the security team's group chat. "I think so," I said, sipping the coffee. Part of me still can't believe they'd actually try to show up after everything, but they're your family, and they've never respected your boundaries before, Jessica finished for me. "That's why we're prepared." The first vehicles appeared on my security cameras at 9:30 a.m., a full 4 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. 2 catering vans pulled up to my front gate, where they were met by James and another security guard. I turned up the volume to hear the conversation. "We're here for the Anderson-Hawthorne wedding," the driver explained cheerfully. "We need to start setting up." "I'm sorry, but there's no event scheduled at this property today," James replied politely but firmly. "The owner has not authorized access for any wedding or event." The driver looked confused. "There must be some mistake. We have a contract for this address." "Your contract isn't with the property owner," James explained, handing over a printed copy of the cease and desist letter. "This property is not available for the event you're describing, and the owner has explicitly denied permission for its use." The caterers made several phone calls before reluctantly departing, clearly confused and concerned. Similar scenes played out over the next 2 hours as florists, photographers, and the rental company all arrived and were turned away. At noon, a large black SUV pulled up to the gate. The security feed showed my father emerging from the driver's side, my mother from the passenger seat. Even through the camera, I could see the fury in my father's stance as he approached James. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice carrying clearly through the audio. "I'm Frederick Anderson. This is a family property, and we have an event scheduled." "Sir, this is the private residence of Allison Anderson." James responded calmly. "She has not authorized any event today and has explicitly instructed us to deny access to anyone attempting to hold a wedding or similar gathering." "This is ridiculous," my father blustered. "I'm her father." "She's obviously confused about the arrangements. Ms. Anderson's instructions were very clear, sir. I have documentation of her wishes and the legal notices that were sent to all parties involved." James handed over another copy of the cease and desist letter. My father barely glanced at it before crumpling it in his fist. "Where is she?" "I demand to speak with my daughter immediately. Ms. Anderson is not on the premises today." "Again, sir. I must ask you to leave the property." My mother stepped forward then, her face a mask of cold dignity that I remembered all too well from childhood confrontations. "Surely we can discuss this reasonably. There are 200 guests on their way here, including several state officials." "I understand that's inconvenient, ma'am. But it doesn't change the fact that this is private property and you do not have permission to be here. Those guests will also be turned away." The standoff continued for several minutes. with my parents alternating between threats, appeals to family obligation, and attempts to intimidate the security team. James remained immovable, repeatedly explaining that they were at risk of being charged with criminal trespass if they refused to leave. Eventually, more vehicles began arriving, including one containing Daniel and who I assumed was Amelia in the back seat, though she remained in the car. The scene quickly grew chaotic as confused guests in formal attire congregated at my gate, while my father, now red-faced with anger, argued loudly with both the security team and someone on his phone. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from the security team. "They've called the local police," he informed me. "Your father is claiming that you've hired people to illegally block him from family property." I felt a flash of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by certainty. "The property deed is in my name alone. I have all the documentation." Sure enough, when the police arrived 15 minutes later, the situation was resolved quickly. After reviewing the property deeds James provided and the cease and desist letters, they informed my family that they had no legal right to access the property without my permission. "The owner has made it clear you're not welcome here today," I heard one officer explain to my father. "You need to leave now, sir, or we'll have to consider this criminal trespass." What happened next caught me completely by surprise. The car door opened and a young woman in a wedding dress emerged, her face streaked with tears. Amelia, Daniel's bride, walked directly up to the officers. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly over the security feed. "Did Daniel's family really try to hold our wedding at his sister's house without her permission? After not speaking to her for 16 years? The raw hurt and confusion in her voice made my heart ache for her. This was supposed to be her special day, and instead she was standing on the street in her wedding gown, learning ugly truths about the family she was marrying into. "Ma'am, I can't comment on family dynamics," the officer replied carefully. "All I can tell you is that this property belongs solely to Allison Anderson, and she has not authorized its use for any event today." Amelia turned to Daniel, who had followed her from the car. "You told me she had agreed to host. You said she was excited to reconnect with the family through our wedding." Daniel's response wasn't audible from the camera angle, but his defensive body language told the story. Amelia's next words, however, rang out clearly. "I can't believe you would lie about something so important. This is humiliating for everyone involved." She turned back to my parents. "And you too. How could you try to force your way onto your daughter's property after disowning her? What kind of people do that?" The confrontation continued for several more minutes before Amelia, still visibly upset, was led back to the car by what appeared to be her parents. The assembled guests were gradually directed to return to their vehicles, with many looking confused and uncomfortable as they departed. My parents and Daniel remained arguing with each other at the gate for some time before finally leaving as well, my father's parting words to the security team clearly picked up by the microphone. "This isn't over. Tell Allison she'll regret this childish stunt." By mid-afternoon, the last of the wedding party had departed, and an eerie calm settled over my property. The security team conducted a thorough check to ensure no one had attempted to access the grounds from the beach or neighboring properties, but everything was secure. "They're all gone," Jessica said softly, closing her laptop. "You did it, Allison. You protected your boundaries." I nodded, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Relief, certainly. Pride in standing my ground. But also a deep sadness for what the day represented, another painful chapter in a family history already filled with hurt. "Poor Amelia," I said after a moment. "She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this." "No, she didn't," Marcus agreed. "But from what we saw, she seems like someone with a strong sense of right and wrong. She recognized immediately how wrong this whole situation was." I stayed with Jessica and Marcus that night, not quite ready to return home despite the security team's assurances that the property was secure. As I tried to sleep in their guest room, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Daniel. alternating between angry accusations and desperate pleas to help fix the situation. I silenced the notifications without reading them. Whatever happened next with my family, I had made it clear that I wouldn't be manipulated or controlled. The little girl desperate for their approval was long gone, replaced by a woman who understood her own worth didn't depend on their validation. I returned home the following day, half expecting to find damage or some sign of retaliation. But everything was exactly as I'd left it. The only evidence of the previous day's drama was a pile of discarded decorations near my front gate, apparently abandoned in the hasty departure. James and his security team had stayed overnight as a precaution and gave me a full report. "After you left, we did a complete perimeter check," he explained. "A few guests tried to access the beachside thinking they could get in that way, but our team intercepted them. No incidents, just confusion." I thanked them for their thoroughness and professionalism, relieved that the confrontation hadn't escalated further. As I cleaned up the abandoned decorations, I couldn't help but notice they were elegant and expensive, cream and gold with accents of blue that would have actually complemented my home's aesthetic. In another universe, one where my family had apologized and genuinely sought reconciliation, I might have been happy to host my brother's wedding. The thought brought a fresh wave of sadness for what could have been. The social media fallout began that evening. I rarely used social platforms, preferring to keep my private life separate from my business presence online, but Jessica called to warn me. "Your mother has posted a very creative version of events," she said grimly. "You might want to prepare yourself before looking." My mother's post portrayed me as a vindictive sister who had deliberately sabotaged my brother's wedding out of jealousy and spite. According to her narrative, they had been trying to heal family wounds by including me in this special day, only to be met with irrational hostility. She carefully omitted the 16 years of silence, the lack of invitation to participate in wedding planning, and most importantly, my explicit refusal to host the event. The comment section was filled with sympathetic responses from their social circle, many condemning my selfish behavior without knowing any of the actual facts. It was a masterclass in manipulation, playing perfectly into my mother's carefully cultivated public image as the matriarch of an ideal family. I chose not to respond publicly. Engaging in a social media war would only drag me down to their level and likely prolong the drama. Instead, I focused on dealing with the practical aftermath, including checking in with vendors who had been caught in the middle and clarifying that I had never authorized any services at my address. 3 days after the wedding debacle, I received an unexpected call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another angry family member, but something told me to take the call. "Hello, is this Allison Anderson?" A female voice asked tentatively. "Yes, this is Allison. This is Amelia Hawthorne, or I guess still Hawthorne, since there wasn't actually a wedding." She gave a small, nervous laugh. "I hope it's okay that I called. I got your number from the security company. I told them I needed to apologize to you personally." I was stunned into momentary silence. Of all the people involved in the situation, Amelia was the only innocent party, yet she was the one reaching out to apologize. "You have absolutely nothing to apologize for," I assured her quickly. "If anything, I should apologize to you for the disruption to your wedding day." "No," she said firmly. "What happened wasn't your fault. It was Daniel's and your parents'. I had no idea they were planning to use your home without permission. Daniel told me you were excited about reconnecting with the family and had generously offered your beautiful waterfront property." Her words confirmed what I had suspected, that my family had been lying not just to vendors, but to Amelia and her family as well. "I'm so sorry they put you in that position," I said sincerely. "It must have been awful to discover the truth on what should have been your wedding day." "It was a shock," she admitted. "But honestly, it was also illuminating. I've been dating Daniel for 3 years, and I always sensed something off about his family stories. There was this sister who was never mentioned except in passing, no photos of you anywhere. Whenever I asked direct questions, the subject would change. Now I understand why. We talked for nearly an hour. Amelia was intelligent and perceptive, asking thoughtful questions about my estrangement from the family without ever becoming judgmental. I found myself sharing more than I'd intended. Perhaps because she represented a connection to my family that wasn't tainted by the pain of the past. Daniel isn't a bad person, she said toward the end of our conversation. But he spent his entire life trying to please your parents, and it's warped his sense of right and wrong. We're taking some time apart right now. I need to decide if I can marry into a family capable of such calculated cruelty. Her words struck me deeply because they echoed thoughts I'd had about Daniel over the years. He had been shaped by our parents' expectations just as I had, but where I had eventually broken free, he had conformed more and more tightly to their mold. Whatever you decide, I told her. Make sure it's what's right for you, not what avoids conflict or pleases others. That's good advice, she said quietly. Actually, that's part of why I wanted to talk to you. You seem to have built an amazing life on your own terms. I admire that strength. After our call, I felt an unexpected lightness. Connecting with Amelia had provided a perspective on my family I'd never had before, an outside view that validated my experiences without the bias of shared history. Over the next few weeks, I maintained sporadic contact with Amelia, who kept me updated on the family fallout. The wedding had been hastily rescheduled at a local hotel, significantly scaled down due to the embarrassment of the original debacle. Many guests, particularly those from Amelia's side, had declined to attend after witnessing the scene at my gate. Your parents are telling everyone it was all a misunderstanding, Amelia reported during one call. They're claiming you had agreed to host, but changed your mind at the last minute without telling anyone. Some people are buying it, but not everyone. 6 weeks after the incident, Daniel appeared at my front gate unannounced. Security called to alert me, and after a moment's hesitation, I agreed to speak with him in the garden, making sure James was nearby just in case. My brother looked different than I remembered, older of course, but also somehow diminished. The confident golden child had been replaced by a man who couldn't quite meet my eyes as he walked toward me. I need to talk to you, he said without preamble. I'm listening, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Amelia broke off our engagement, he blurted out. She says she can't marry into a family that would treat their own daughter and sister the way we treated you. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. This is your fault, he accused, a flash of the old entitlement breaking through. If you had just gone along with the wedding plans, none of this would have happened. Is that really why you came here, Daniel? To blame me for the consequences of your own actions. He paced a few steps, running his hand through his hair in frustration. You don't understand what it's been like. Mom and Dad are furious. Dad's political connections are questioning his judgment. Mom had to step down from 2 of her charity boards because of the gossip. I'm sorry your actions have had consequences, I said evenly. But that doesn't make them my responsibility. We're family, Ollie, he said, using my childhood nickname again. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with 16 years of history. It used to mean everything to me, I finally replied. I would have done anything for this family, Daniel. I wanted nothing more than to be accepted and loved. But you all made it very clear that your conditions for that love were more important than I was. That's not fair, he protested weakly. Isn't it? Where were you when Dad threw me out with 1 suitcase? Where were you for 16 birthdays, 16 Christmases? Where were you when I was working 3 jobs just to afford tuition? Or when I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford furniture? He had no answer, his gaze fixed on the ground. You can't disappear from someone's life for 16 years and then reappear only when you want something from them, I continued. That's not how family works. That's not how any relationship works. So what am I supposed to do now? He asked, sounding genuinely lost. That's up to you, Daniel. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to start with honesty and respect. A real apology. Not because you want something, but because you understand the hurt you caused. And boundaries, very clear boundaries. He left soon after, promising to think about what I said. Much as he had during our phone call before the wedding. I wasn't sure if anything would actually change, but for the first time, I felt I had spoken my truth directly to a family member without fear or desperation for approval. Over the next several months, I received tentative outreach from various family members who had witnessed or heard about the wedding fiasco. Some were merely curious, hoping for gossip, but others seemed genuinely concerned about the family dynamics they had glimpsed. My Aunt Geraldine, my father's sister who had always been a bit of an outsider herself, called to say she had never known the full story of my estrangement. They told everyone you had cut contact with the family because you were resentful of Daniel's success, she explained. I always thought it seemed unlike the Allison I remembered. These conversations revealed how effectively my parents had controlled the narrative about my absence, painting themselves as the injured parties rather than the instigators of the estrangement. It was both painful and validating to finally have the truth emerging. For months after the wedding incident, I received a letter from my mother. Not an email or text, but a formal letter written on the heavy stationery she had always favored for important correspondence. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure what to expect. To my astonishment, it contained what appeared to be a genuine apology. She acknowledged the hurt caused by their rejection, admitted that their conditions for love had been unreasonable, and expressed regret for the years of lost connection. She wrote of watching my success from afar, of pride mingled with sadness that she had not been part of it. I cannot undo the past, she wrote near the end, but I can ask if there might be a path forward, however tentative, however slow. I read the letter multiple times, searching for the manipulative undertones I had come to expect from my mother. There was a hint of her typical formality, but the words themselves seemed sincere in a way I had never experienced from her before. After consulting with my therapist and sharing the letter with Jessica, I decided to respond cautiously. I wrote that I was open to beginning a conversation, but that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort on both sides. I set clear expectations about respectful communication and acknowledgement of boundaries. The journey toward potential reconciliation would be long and uncertain. Some wounds might never fully heal. But standing firm against their attempt to invade my home had paradoxically opened a door that had been sealed shut for 16 years. By refusing to be manipulated or controlled, I had commanded a respect that mere compliance never would have earned. Whatever happened next with my family, I knew with absolute certainty that I would face it on my own terms, from a position of strength rather than need. The home I had built, both literally and figuratively, could withstand any storm because its foundation was my own hard-won self-worth. The one-year anniversary of what my friends now jokingly call the wedding that wasn't recently passed, and it's given me time to reflect on everything that's happened since that day. Life has taken some unexpected turns, both challenging and healing. My relationship with my family remains complicated, a careful dance of tentative connection and firm boundaries. The initial letter from my mother did prove to be a genuine attempt at reconciliation, though the road has been far from smooth. We began with brief, carefully neutral phone calls once a month, gradually increasing in frequency and depth as trust slowly rebuilt. 3 months after her letter, we met in person for the first time in 17 years at a restaurant halfway between our homes. Neutral territory where neither of us held home court advantage. Seeing my mother walk through the door, noticeably older than the image I had carried in my memory, brought a flood of emotions I wasn't fully prepared for. "You look well, Allison," she said as she sat down, her voice carrying that same crisp tone I remembered, though somewhat softened. "Your business seems to be thriving." "It is," I confirmed. "I have 11 designers working for me now, and we're opening a second office in Chicago next month." The conversation was stilted at first, both of us carefully avoiding potential landmines. But as the meal progressed, something shifted. Perhaps it was the third glass of wine. Or perhaps it was simply time doing its work, but my mother's carefully maintained facade began to crack. "I was wrong," she said suddenly, setting down her fork. "About everything. Your career choice, cutting you off, all of it. I've spent 17 years being wrong, and I don't know how to fix that." The raw honesty caught me off guard. "I don't know if it can be fixed," I replied after a moment, "but acknowledging it is somewhere to start." We talked more openly after that, about the pain of the estrangement, about the hardships I had faced, about her regrets. It wasn't a magical healing of all wounds, but it was the first real conversation we had ever had as adults, without the power dynamics that had defined our relationship throughout my childhood. My father has been a more difficult case. His initial outreach was clearly at my mother's insistence, stiff and formal, more concerned with appearances than genuine reconciliation. We've had several strained interactions, but I'm not sure we'll ever develop a close relationship. Some bridges, once burned, leave only ashes too fine to rebuild upon. Daniel and I have made more progress than I ever expected. The failure of his engagement to Amelia triggered what he describes as a complete reevaluation of his life choices and values. He enrolled in therapy, something our parents had always dismissed as weakness, and began the difficult work of separating his own identity from the expectations that had been placed on him. "I was the golden child," he admitted during one of our early conversations, "but that came with its own prison. Every choice was made for me, every path predetermined. Watching you build your own life, however hard it was at first, you were free in a way I never was." 6 months ago, Daniel made the dramatic decision to leave our father's law firm to start his own practice, focusing on family advocacy. Our parents were predictably upset, but for perhaps the first time in his life, he stood firm against their disapproval. As for Amelia, we've developed an unexpected friendship. Though she and Daniel eventually decided not to reconcile romantically, she has become a valued part of my chosen family. Her insight and warmth have been a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections come from the most unlikely beginnings. My home remains my sanctuary, though I've chosen to share it more openly now, hosting small gatherings for friends and colleagues, even a charity event for a local arts education program. The space that my family once tried to claim without permission has become a place of genuine connection and community, filled with people who respect both the home and its owner. The most profound healing, however, has come from within. Standing firm against my family's intrusion forced me to fully claim my own worth in a way I hadn't before. The lingering doubt, the small voice that wondered if perhaps I deserved their rejection, has finally been silenced. I've learned that family can be redefined, expanded, chosen. It can include biological relatives who earn their way back into your life through genuine effort and respect. It can include friends who stand beside you during your darkest moments. It can include unexpected connections formed through shared experiences, even painful ones. Most importantly, I've learned that protecting your boundaries isn't selfish, it's essential. Creating a life on your own terms isn't rebellious, it's courageous. And forgiving those who hurt you doesn't mean allowing them to hurt you again. It means freeing yourself from the weight of resentment while maintaining the wisdom that experience has taught. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever struggled with family expectations or had to build your own path after rejection, know that you're not alone. The journey isn't easy, but it's yours. And that makes it valuable beyond measure. Have you ever had to stand up to family who only remembered you when they needed something? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story helped you feel less alone in your own family struggles, please like and subscribe to support more stories of healing and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family we create matters more than the family we're born into.